Deputy Prime Minister's with us now. Good morning. Thanks
for joining
us on the programme. Tory sleaze. How long have you personally known Chris Pincher was an alleged sex pest?
Well, that's a very generic term. What's the specific question? I've obviously seen the most recent reports. He's stepped down as a minister. He's had the whip withdrawn. I think the reports are very serious. They deserve to be independently investigated. That's what will now happen under the parliamentary grievance process. I think we need to respect that. I think the integrity of the system is very important. For me, the most important thing is that anyone who's got a complaint of this kind of severity must feel confident and comfortable in coming forward.
What exactly did you know about his behaviour?
Well,
there's a list. There's a list as long as my arm.
Yeah, but that's true. So, but there's always reports and rumours swirling around Westminster. It's that kind of place, you know that. And lots of these things don't materialise. And actually, having worked with Chris Pincher, I always found him, on the whole, very professional. But as there's a report about a complaint that was made at the Foreign Office, I'm sure you're poised to ask me about that. And we dealt with that in the most rigorous and robust way.
I'll do the questions, you do the answers. 2019, he was working for you. Were you completely comfortable with being his boss when these sort of allegations were being levelled against him?
Well, just to be clear, because that's a specific question, I can give you a very clear answer.
Go on then.
There was a complaint made by someone that worked with him about inappropriate behaviour. I swiftly agreed with the Permanent Secretary, Sir Simon MacDonald, at the time, that ought to be reviewed under the civil services auspices to make sure it was done without fear or favour. It came back and did not recommend formal disciplinary action, and it should be said that the individual that made the complaint did not want that. I spoke to Chris Pincher about the inappropriate behaviour, made it clear in no uncertain terms it should desist, it must never be repeated. So did the Permanent Secretary. For additional assurance, because I take this so seriously, I also referred it to the Cabinet Office Propriety and Ethics team, which also looked at it, for example, to see whether action was warranted under the Ministerial Code. They didn't. They agreed that it didn't warrant that. So although there was a complaint made about inappropriate behaviour, it did not trigger the disciplinary action either at the civil service level or the Cabinet Office level in relation to the Code of Conduct. So I not only followed it to the strict letter, I went beyond that and sought the assurance. Why? Because I think it's so important that people that make complaints feel and can have the confidence to come forward.
So it's the Propriety and Ethics team's fault that he continues on with this list of inappropriate behaviour, at the very least.
I don't think anyone could say I was blaming them. Anyone. What I wanted to make sure is that there was proper assurance and integrity around the process, because that's so important. There's a load of, you know what Westminster's like, there's a whole rumour mill, but when you get a specific complaint, important that that's handled rigorously, robustly and fairly. Again, I also make the point that the individual concerned wanted to continue working with Chris Pincher at the time and did not want formal action taken.
What about the Prime Minister's now wife, who made her comments in writing in 2017 when she worked at Tory Central Office?
Well, I can't speak to that. I don't know about that, but of course that was under the previous Prime Minister.
Yeah, but the Prime Minister must have known. Are you suggesting that Carrie, then Symonds, now Johnson, never spoke to her Prime Minister husband about the behaviour of this man? No,
that wasn't what I was suggesting. I don't know the facts of it. What I was saying is that the reappointment of Chris Pincher back in 2017, following complaints that had been made about him at the time, followed a process, an independent process conducted by a QC, which did not uphold the claims made against him. And his reappointment as a minister at that time was obviously under the previous government and the previous Prime Minister. Those are the facts as I know them.
OK. Talk to me about what Downing Street were telling Junior Minister, bless him, yesterday, Will Quince. This is what he said to us on the show yesterday. It's going to be in this screen.
I spoke with Number 10 both yesterday and today, and I asked them firmly and clearly for an answer on this, and I've been given categorical assurance that the Prime Minister was not aware of any serious specific allegation with regards to the former Deputy Chief Whip.
Is that true?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think the Prime Minister is aware of any substantiated complaints to the extent that they would trigger a formal mechanism. And as I said, I think there's a distinction between the rumour mill of Westminster and complaints that either result in a formal process or a formal sanction.
Yeah, but the Prime Minister, we heard from Downing Street, 3 hours later, saying that 4 hours later, the Prime Minister was aware of allegations that were either resolved or did not progress to a formal complaint. As a lawyer, I mean, can you tell me the difference between those 2 points?
Yeah, the difference is a complaint that is made that is of where there's the evidence and it's of the severity where formal either disciplinary action is taken, which is something which would happen in all professional walks of life, or in addition, triggers mechanisms, for example, under the Ministerial Code of Conduct. And so the allegations that we're talking about had not reached that level, and that's precisely what the account I think I've just given you fairly and squarely about what happened in October of 2019.
So just to clarify, not aware of specific allegations is what the Minister sat there and said he checked with Number 10. They said to say, not aware of specific allegations. 4 hours later, aware of allegations that were resolved or did not progress to a formal complaint. That is dancing on the head of a pin.
I don't think it is. I think Will, from what I just understood, talked about specific and serious allegations. And I think there's a distinction between something which is either not of the severity or is resolved informally and something which clearly does trigger a formal disciplinary action or formal sanction. And I think most people would understand that that is a fair and reasonable distinction to draw.
But there's a pattern of behaviour, isn't there? 2012, 2013, 2017, 2019, September 2019, 2021, October 2021, December 2021, June 2022. Is that really somebody who is an appropriate person to be laying down the law as Deputy Chief Whip?
Well, you've just read out a list of dates, and I don't know what each one referred to, but all I can say is where there's been a credible complaint made, they've been followed up, whether it was by me in the Foreign Office or in 2017, there was a QC that conducted the process. I think that's right. There is a rumour mill in Westminster, and I think it's important both for the confidence of victims, but also fairness, that you have independent processes. And I think that's absolutely... I mean, what you're complaining about is that we've been too loyally and done it too much by the book.
I'm not complaining at all. I'm trying to get down to the bottom of what's going on.
But I think it is important to be absolutely rigorous and scrupulously go by the book. And of course, in relation to Chris Pincher's appointment as Deputy Chief Whip, the Cabinet Office Propriety and Ethics team did not raise an objection to that appointment. We rely on these independent processes because they're capable of commanding the trust of those with which we work, and that is the crucial thing in all this case.
I've got to wonder where the bar is, though. How high are we setting or low are we setting this bar?
Well, I don't think it's right that just because there's rumour and gossip, someone loses their job. I do think...
Of course not.
No, I do think it is right that when a complaint is made, it is properly investigated, and then you know, is it serious enough, is it credible enough to warrant formal action, whether it's disciplinary or under the Ministerial Code. I think that's the right bar to set.
OK. So when you were his boss,
yeah,
you were completely happy with his behaviour. You say that you pulled him to one side on one occasion.
Yeah.
Why was that?
Because of the complaint that was made.
What was the complaint?
Just because I'm respecting the confidentiality of the processes and those involved, I don't think it's right for me to go into that. I know why you asked the question. What I would just say is I spoke to him in no uncertain terms. I have to say, and this is no excuse, this is no mitigation, but if you're asking me, my sense is that Chris Pincher was actually an exceptional minister and very well regarded. And it's interesting, and this sometimes is the case with inappropriate behaviour, it's interesting that the complainant that came forward did not want formal action taken. Now,
that can be for all sorts of
exactly.
reasons.
No, I'm agreeing with you.
As we know.
And that is why, I totally agree, and that is why that relationship between ministers and the civil servants who do such a fabulous job for us needs to be protected. And that is precisely why I went and asked the Cabinet Office to look at it again to check that the judgment of the civil service was right.
But I don't know what to say to you, because no action was taken against him. You say there wasn't enough evidence because someone didn't want to press that further for whatever reason. They might have been anxious, they might have been concerned.
But the reason you have an independent process is also to check, regardless of what the complainant says, whether it is of a severity that would warrant disciplinary action.
But it looks as though it went on and on and on, even to the extent where middle of last week, he was groping allegedly 2 men at the Carlton Club, people watching what was going on.
Well, in the minute that complaint was made, he resigned himself. I don't think he had any choice. And the whip was removed pending a formal investigation under the grievance and complaints procedure of the House of Commons. That is the correct way to handle that allegation.
What did the PM actually know, do you think? I'm sure you must have talked about it.
At which point in time? I've talked him through, in recent days, what happened in 2019. My sense is, but again, I can't speak for exactly what the Prime Minister knew, but my sense is that he would have been aware when the wire was tripped into formal disciplinary action, or let alone a formal sanction. But of course, we're constantly, Westminster is awash with gossip, rumour, and I think it is right to draw that distinction.
Talking about what happened with you in 2019 when you had to, let's say, discipline him, you say talk to him.
Well, it wasn't disciplinary action. It's very important to draw that distinction.
So when you had to speak to him firmly, did you then subsequently tell the Prime Minister about it?
No, and I wouldn't expect to in relation to something that fell below the bar of disciplinary action. What I did do was inform the Chief Whip, because I do think it's important that we keep a proper record, and I referred it to the Cabinet Office Propriety and Ethics team because I wanted the assurance, and that's not to say that I disagreed with the view of the Permanent Secretary or the Civil Service, but because I attach such importance to those around and those who work with us having the confidence in the processes which are there to protect them. It's very important, and I take that incredibly seriously.
The FDA and Prospect unions, they represent about 1,000 parliamentary workers. They say that Parliament is an unsafe place to work because, potentially, of people like this.
Well, that's why we've got the new process in place, an independent grievance and complaint process, and we need to vest them with the power and the confidence to do their job. In the relation to Chris Pincher, that's exactly what's happening.
OK. Talk to me about what should happen to him now.
Well, I think if you've got an independent process, it's right to allow them to conduct their investigation, and then depends on the outcome. And I'm not going to get ahead of that. He's not a Tory MP. He's had the whip removed, suspended, pending that investigation. That's the right thing. I do also think when you've got a formal mechanism like this, you've got to respect and not impinge on its ability to conduct that investigation without prejudice.
When you look back, what would you have done differently?
I've done exactly the same again.
Even though it appears from this list that I've read to you, I don't need to go into all of the details, not least because there are children watching at this time in the morning. But back from 2012 through to 2022, that's a 10-year period where it looks as though he has potentially abused several people on varying levels.
And that's the luxury of a journalist.
I was going to go on to say, given that, should the police be investigating?
Well, look, you asked me what I could have done, should have done differently. I think it's critically important to have an independent process. Once the Civil Service had conducted it, I wanted the reassurance of the Cabinet Office, but there was nothing that was reported back to me that would have warranted disciplinary action, let alone a police investigation. Of course, if I'd have known something different, a different set of facts, I would have acted on them as quickly and as rigorously as I did the complaint that I became aware of.
OK, it's good to talk to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you.
We've got to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.